Okay, Camila, I think you can start.
Well, thank you, Professor Nythamar. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another Conjecture Zoom talk. Today we have Professor Caputo's second talk entitled, Would You Rather Be a Cyborg, an Angel, or a Posthuman? Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Religion. A quick introduction. Professor Caputo is the Thomas Watson Professor of Religious Emeritus at Syracuse University and the David R. Cook Professor of Philosophy Emeritus at Villanova University. Professor Caputo has been well known as a Heidegger scholar with major contributions to continental philosophy, especially in the field of phenomenology, hermeneutics, and deconstruction, with seminal writings on Kierkegaard, Russell, Heidegger, Derrida, and Marion. In the past 20 years, his work in philosophy of religion and postmodern Christianity brought about a major theological movement known as Wiki Theology. Thank you again, Professor Caputo, for accepting your invitation.
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I and to Nita for inviting me back twice in a row. I think twice will be enough. There'll be a saturated. I will become a saturated phenomenon if we do any more of this. As I was saying to Nita before we started, last week I knew what I was talking about. It was something about which I have been I've been working on those questions all my life. What I brought up, suggested to Nita for a subject this week is something that I think is important because I think this is where the future lies, and the future of philosophy and the future of theology and the future of religion. And so, at my age, I'm thinking about the past, but I'm also thinking about the future. And I do think that the challenge that faces religion today, well, one of them, it's got a it's challenge. It's a very challenged phenomenon. But one of the challenges that it faces today is posed by the information technology, the revolution in information technology. So what I'm talking about today, the topic, the title is actually the title of a chapter in a book that's coming out from Indiana University Press next year, entitled "Specters of God." So, as I said last week, I've been making the same argument from different points of view ever since the weakness of God. I've been making this argument about the weakness of God as opposed to the classical notion of the omnipotence of God, which is the weakness of the call, the weakness of a weak force in Derrida, the insistence of God as opposed to God's existence, the folly of God, which is the folly of God is that God does not exist, but God leaves existence to us. Last week, a theology of the cross, that is, that this notion of God that I'm putting forward is a radically crucified God, radically deconstructed God that an empty God who needs fulfillment in the world. And now this last trope, I don't know if it's the last, but it's the most recent trope, specters of God, the spectrality of God. And so I followed through in various ways this phenomenon of spectrality, beginning with going all the way back. So there's a little bit of a autobiographical thing here, going all the way back to medieval angelology. Now, when I was quite young, I was a Christian brother, a De La Salle brother. Lee Johnson teaches at Christian Brothers University in Memphis. Well, I was a member of that order. And in those days, I had what you might call angel envy. Because, angels were in medieval theology a summit. It was the summit of creation. They were pure spirits who lived forever, joined everlastingly in union with God. So what's not to envy, right? Pure intelligences. And there was a debate in the Middle Ages about whether they had bodies or not, because they had to explain why they were limited, why they were created. If they were created, they were limited. In what way were they limited? If they were pure spirits, how were they limited? So the Franciscans said, well, they must have some kind of bodies, but they're ethereal, celestial bodies. Whereas Thomas Aquinas said, no, they're pure spirits, but they're finite beings. Their being is finite, but their substance is pure spirit. Okay. And so I may not believe this, but I wrote my master's thesis on Thomistic angelology. I was very interested in angels. Well, about 10 years ago, maybe 10 years, maybe 12 years ago, I came across a book by Michel Serres, S-E-R-R-E-S, Michel Serres, on angelology, actually. And Michel Serres is sort of the muse of Bruno Latour. So a great deal of what Bruno Latour has to say is back to Michel Serres. And so Serres wrote a book called La Légende des Anges, literally the legend of angels. It got translated as Angels of Modern Myth, and that sort of screwed it up because he meant La Légende in the sense of a mythology, a legend, but also as a legendum, a reading key. So he was saying, he says, look, if you follow what is being said about angels in classical theology, it's a key to contemporary information technology. And so he wrote this book. It's a kind of cocktail table book. It's big, full of pictures of Renaissance angels and contemporary airplanes. And he did off this quite interesting analogy of medieval angelology and modern AI. And he wrote this in the early 90s, so he never even saw an iPhone when he was writing this thing. And it's quite a prophetic book, quite an interesting book. And I was fascinated by it. And at the same time, I got an invitation to give a talk at Duquesne University on posthumanism. And so I talked about Michel Serres' book. Now, so what I'm interested in is for today, what the topic for today's talk is, what all this has to do with and for and to religion and theology. And to take my point of departure, to set this thing up, I'm going to take my point of departure from a book called Cyborg Selves by a woman named Jennifer Thwaite Bates. She's a theologian who teaches in Florida. And she poses the question of religion and theology vis-a-vis AI in terms of a distinction between the cyborg and the upload. So we got two paradigms here, the cybernetic organism and the upload, which is a kind of limit case. The upload is ultimately the possibility of uploading consciousness into the cloud, onto a computer, and giving it a electronic existence. It's kind of a limit case. It's as far as you could take this thing. Cyborg is something more immediate and given. There are already cybernetic organisms around. So, and of course, the word cyborg is, or the most interesting use of the word cyborg for philosophers is Donna Haraway's piece in 1985, a manifesto for cyborgs, which sort of scares the daylights out of humanists, right? When they hear this thing, they head for the door. And she meant it to be what she calls a blasphemous myth, one that violates the piety of the natural order and the natural myth, that we should not interfere with nature. And that, of course, is an order which consigns women to the order of passivity and receptivity and materiality, lower down on the scale, whereas men emerge from and can transcend nature and become autonomous rational beings. So she wants to taunt that natural myth with a blasphemous, impious myth, with the image of a gender bender or a shapeshifter or a boundary breaker, and to displace human exceptionalism, to displace any form of essentialism, really, because she's talking about border breakdown, the breakdown of the distinction between human and non-human, between living and non-living, and even between material and non-material. All those borders break down. And so thinking is border thinking. It thinks on the borders and the transitions between these things. And of course, her own personal interest is in, as her subsequent work, she didn't continue to work on Cyborg so much as Cyborg continued to work on what she calls our companion species. The Cyborg, she says, was not born in the Garden of Eden. It's not the son of the child of Adam and Eve. It is this outrageous figure. What's interesting is at the very end, the last sentence in the essay, she says, "I would rather be a cyborg than a goddess." I would rather be a cyborg than a goddess, which is part of the inspiration for my title, What Would You Rather Be? So why doesn't she want to be a goddess? Because that seems like the perfection of the cyborg, but it's not, because the goddess for her is a frozen ice queen. It's a pure, feminized, essentialized woman who rises above the order of nature. So what she's interested in when talking about a cyborg is the cybernetic organism. So it's the organic structure that is irreducible for her. And the cybernetic is a graft, an enhancement of the organic. So she means it when she, this final sentence, you see that she means to be getting in the face not only of the pious myth of the order of nature, but also she's also getting in the face of the original, what she calls the original cyborg, which was a creation of the United States Air Force, which was meant to enhance our capacity, the human capacity to survive in space and to undertake long trips in space that would last years and years. And she says that too is a myth. It's a patriarchal myth. In Irigaray's terms, it's a patriarchal myth of man emerging from the watery womb and then sort of shaking off the water like a puppy and asserting his rational individuality as a liberal individual. So she's not interested in that either. She doesn't want. She's not talking about the Air Force's cyborg, and she's not talking about leaving her body behind. She's talking about a embodied but enhanced being. A hybrid. She's interested in hybridity. She likes any kind of figure of polymorphism or hybridity is congenial. Now, for the hardline posthumanists, incidentally, there's no stable vocabulary in this field. The way I'm going to use this term is, I'm going to say, because I think this is probably the closest thing to a stable vocabulary, but transit humanism refers to transitional humanism. That is the passage from the human to some kind of post-human state in the future. So the post-human would then mean whatever it is that wherever this is going to go, and ideally, or as a limit case, conceptual limit case, transcending biology altogether. what would be utterly posthuman, perfectly, purely posthuman, would be beyond biology. You would have transcended, you would no longer be a rational animal, because the animality would have been surpassed. So for hardline posthumanists or transhumanists, what Don Haraway is doing is a half step. It's her heart's not in it. She's interested in enhancing biology, not transcending it. They want to transcend it. She's interested in hybridity. They're interested in getting past any organic mix. They're interested in replacing, in terms of religion, they're interested in replacing religion altogether, because they think all of the things that religion was talking about exorcising demons and living on forever and healing the sick, all the figures in the New Testament, all the bodies in the New Testament are ill or paralyzed or leprous, and Jesus heals them. Well, all of that, the hard humanists will say, or transhumanists will say, is fulfilled by technology, and it's replaced by technology. Now, one of more interesting attempts to deal with this question. So the cyborg has a certain congeniality to religion, whereas the transhumanists appear to be radically post-religion. Now, one figure that's sort of interesting in all of this is a woman named Ilya Delia. Ilya got a PhD in psychopharmacology, so what she's interested in was brain science. And then at some point in her life, she decided she had a religious vocation, so she joined a religious order. Started out with a contemplative order, and found out that didn't work. And so she joined an active order of Franciscan nuns. And they said to her, Ilya, we're going to send you to theology school. And she said, theology, what's that? She was interested in psychopharmacology. She was interested in science. So she got a degree in theology, and in doing that, discovered Teilhard de Chardin. And that's sort of the inspiration, the muse. That's her muse, is Teilhard. And her view is that there should not be a war between postmodernism and posthumanism and religion, but a collaboration. She doesn't think that AI replaces religion. She thinks it extends it. It gives it purpose and direction. So you could say, well, what she's interested in is the org in cyborg, so the cyborg, whereas the humanists, post-transhumanists, are interested in the cyborg and eventually getting rid of the organic, which is, when you get Hathaway to talk about religion, Hathaway would agree with Delia. She wants to preserve the organic. She even goes back, Hathaway goes back to the fact that she was raised a Catholic, in Irish Catholic education, and so she has a sense of sacramental, the organic, physical. So you see a kind of interesting thing happening here. The theologians want to be the materialists. Right? They want to stick to matter and the organic, whereas the hardline transhumanists want to transcend matter. So the theologians would rather be cyborgs. The hardliners would rather be angels. They'd rather be disembodied, transcend the biological. So Delia's view is that AI is not the problem, and religion is not the solution. It's only religion as it presently exists, which is the problem, and technology, which she thinks is in danger of misusing AI, which opposes it to religion. Properly integrated, AI would expand religion. How? Well, it would expand the community. It would expand the sense of human companionship. It would help bring forth a global community that would genuinely be global, the way we right now here are all from in very different places on the globe. And clearly, when she thinks, when she starts something like that, she's thinking about Teilhard. She's thinking about the noosphere, the omega point, the evolution of consciousness. So she thinks evolution is religion in formation. Religion is evolution's inner formative energy, giving it direction. And the AI is simply the latest stage in the evolution of human being, human consciousness. So instead of making a distinction between hardline transhumanists and the softies, she makes a distinction between shallow AI, one which has no vision, no direction, and deep AI, which has a sense of personhood and of universal personhood. And she gets into the new, which calls the new axial age, going back to Carl Jung. And so her idea is that religion has to get over its preoccupation with Greek metaphysics, its hostility to science. It needs a whole new, it's a preoccupation with doctrine. It needs a whole new vision of reality, which takes this into account, which takes AI into account and sees it in collaboration. So she's got pretty radical. She's still a nun. They haven't kicked her out yet. We keep waiting for her to get her walking papers. She pursues this line. I would also draw your attention to some work that Mark Taylor. Mark Taylor has a new book called Intervolution. So the working together of the organic and the cybernetic into something else. Like Ilya, Mark Taylor thinks that the whole distinction between natural and artificial intelligence is a mistake. That there's nothing unnatural about artificial intelligence if man is a tool, if human beings are tool-making animals. This is simply the latest stage of human. This is naturing. So instead of distinguishing between nature and the natural and the artificial, you would just distinguish between the present state of nature at this moment in the history of evolution and what's to come. There's no genuine distinction between the natural and the artificial. The artificial is what we do. That's our skill. And then Mark gets into all kinds of stuff about what he calls not just smart bodies like Zoom and our iPhone, but I'm sorry, not just smart things like Zoom or iPhone, but smart bodies that are wired up, bodies that are hooked up. And he himself suffers from diabetes, adult onset diabetes, and has an artificial, basically a pancreatic monitor, which is a chip that he carries about on his belt that monitors his pancreas and is constantly relaying information back to his doctors, and is constantly monitoring his pancreatic activity. So he's intervolving. So he's evolving in connection with this connected world. So he's got a notion of the connected world. Which ultimately goes back to his own interpretation of Hegel. Because he said, the important thing to know about Hegel was Hegel was saying things don't work as isolated integers, things are systems. And so what you got to think of is in terms of open-ended systems. So the proper distinction is not Kierkegaard's distinction between the system and the individual. The proper distinction is between the closed system and the open system. Now, one of the arguments I make in this chapter and elsewhere is that's precisely the argument that Derrida is making in grammatology. The grammatology is an argument for open systems, and the name of closed system in that work are the structuralists. Derrida's notion of the event is of the unforeseeable, unpredictable, unprogrammable. right? The unprogrammable. So now the question would be, what limit is there to all this? How far can you go with all this? How far can the body be integrated with electronic information systems? We are all, to some extent, cyborg, insofar as we have if you've got a crown tooth and you've got a porcelain tooth, not a natural tooth. I myself am a kind of primitive starter or cybernetic organism. I have a titanium hips. I have porcelain teeth. I have silicon lenses in my eyes. So I'm sort of a starter cyborg. But down the road, there are cyborgs to come, as Derrida would say, to come, that will be utterly amazing. Why not be able to simply, by a glance of the mind, access the internet? Why not ultimately upload consciousness into the internet, which is I would say the limit case. There's a certain amount of techno-optimism in all this, right? That you have to be wary of, because remember that what replaced the dinosaurs was not bigger and better dinosaurs, right? Sometimes a species that undergoes an important change is the last year you've heard of them. And Mary Shelley, of course, wrote an interesting book about all that. So there are enormous, imponderably difficult technological problems involved in the upload. But the theory behind it is not complicated. The big theory behind it is not complicated, and that is intelligence is a formal system. And that means it's indifferent to its substrate, in just the way that the rules of chess are indifferent to whether you're playing with figures made of ivory or wood or pixels. Right? So it's a formal system, doesn't depend upon its material substrate. So why not be able to pick up the formal system, the neural network, because intelligence is a network. Well, why not be able to lift up Aufheben? Hegel actually works here. Lift up the formal network onto another substrate, of a more like silicon, or of some substance still in the making that will be even more enduring than silicon. Why not? In principle, I don't know. I mean, for this, you need to know a very great deal of neuroscience, and you need to know a very great deal of computer science, information science. And if I were young, if I were writing my dissertation now, this topic today would be my dissertation. This I think is what's ahead, if we don't poison ourselves to death on our planet or blow ourselves up. So there are enormous technical problems there, but there's also an interesting conceptual problem, and that is when you talk about uploading consciousness into a computer, you can imagine a consciousness being, you can imagine an intelligence that would be super intelligent, that would have incomprehensible speed and be able to tolerate incomprehensible amounts of information. But would a super intelligence be conscious? Or would it just simply be really, really smart? So there's that. That's what they call the hard problem. The other question would be this. Is it copy and paste when you make it, when you take up this? Is it copy and paste, or is it cut and paste? If it's cut and paste, then Jack disappears and is transferred into the cloud, into the electronic medium. If it's copy and paste, Jack is still here. So Jack thinks the upload failed, and the electronic Jack thinks it succeeded. And now there are two Jacks, and which one is me? So there's a conceptual problem here. They said, "Quaestio mihi magna facto sum." I have become a great questioner myself. Well, in this stuff, he's not getting. I mean, this gets difficult. Now, there's a whole lot more here to do. There's more to be said about. I think ultimately this distinction between art and nature fails because I think ultimately what we're talking about are information systems and symbiotic information systems. So I think that distinction deconstructs. I think also if you go on to a further problem, which I'm going to talk about here, but I bring it up in the chapter, and that is if you go to Don Haraway's third distinction between the material and the immaterial, then you get into what Karen Barad calls quantum hauentology. That is, the whole distinction between matter and the immaterial disappears and gives way to ultimately to quantum phenomena and conceivably even to simply more and more radical information systems. So like the notion that the universe is actually a hologram, that all the information required for a three-dimensional universe is already present on a two-dimensional universe. Right? So there's another dimension to this, which is beyond AI, which takes you into quantum physics, which also needs to be addressed. But I want to jump ahead now because we don't have forever to talk about religion. As I said, the paradox and the interesting thing is that theologians today would rather be cyborgs, and the radical transhumanists would rather be angels. They'd rather be like angels. Now that goes back to the Cartesian presuppositions in a lot of this. There's a tendency to a very dualist Enlightenment conception of pure rational consciousness and autonomous liberal individuals behind some of this, which is also a problem that would have to be considered. But when you look at the radical transhumanist and ultimately posthumanist project, it looks a lot like classical theology, classical angelology. Similar question. O death, where is your victory? For the posthumanists, death is a disease that can be cured. For St. Paul, death is the enemy that can be conquered. And both of them have pretty much the same solution in mind, if I can say that. Let me get away with it. Why? Because what the uploaders are talking about is basically transforming and transporting our mind into an electronic medium. So for the uploaders, our biological bodies will be transformed into electronic ones. For St. Paul, our wet, earthly, corruptible body, what he called the soma psychikon, the animated animal body, biological body, that we slog around with in mortal life, will be transformed into an incorruptible, heavenly, spiritual body, a fiery, airy body, the noma pneumaticon. And which goes back to the debate in the Middle Ages between the Franciscans and the Dominicans. The Franciscans says that angels have these celestial bodies. They're fiery, airy bodies, right? Like the posthumanists, whereas St. Thomas said they were pure spirits. There's this and that. They've got spiritual bodies, soma pneumatica. And we're coming to it. And the apocalyptic age is upon us. It's near. For St. Paul, it was coming any day now. And for Ray Kurzweil, it's going to be in the 2040s sometime. So he's popping a lot of pills so he can keep himself alive until then. And then we will be able to live like the angels. Now, this is interesting. This is interesting. What do you mean live like the angels? Well, an angel is a messenger. An angel is basically an instant message system in which God is able to communicate like that when he has to. He's got to get to Abraham fast before Abraham slays Isaac. So he sends an instant message. Angels have the power of flight, of this, and they travel with the speed of thought, they said in the Middle Ages, which is the speed of an electron. They didn't know about the speed of light. They are super intelligent, like Watson. They live forever, like posthumanists want to do. They store enormous amounts of information on the head of a pin. So the ancient mockery of the angels. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Ask yourself, how much information can be stored on the head of a microchip smaller than that? Mock that. They're warriors. A heavenly host means an army. Smart bombs. They fall into evil, bad angels, malicious spirits. And they're capable of fake news. They are disangelic. They spread information, false information rapidly. And ontologically, they are made of celestial matter, like electrons. Right? Now that's all. I wish I could take credit for all that, but that's Michel Serres. You want to read great book, get Michel Serres' La Légende des Hommes. Okay, so what's the future for theology? Theology right now is going down the path of the theologians who are thinking about this at all are going down the path of the cybernetic. That is, they want to hold on to the organism. Why? Well, ask yourself, what need would you have of the incarnation if you are no longer carnal? Jesus's job would become obsolete. Jesus would be out of a job. We would have no longer any need for being redeemed. We would no longer, and on St. Augustine's term, there would be no physical, bodily communication of original sin. We wouldn't be reproducing that way. We wouldn't need Freud anymore because we wouldn't have an unconscious. We would transcend the biological. So the question is, to what extent is theology tied up with biology? Are they inseparable? Are God and human beings in their humanity inseparable? Twins, like parent and child. The one, you have one because you have the other. But once you transcend the biological, the theological disappears. Why? Because all the reasons you wanted the theological are gone. All the things that when Jesus announces his ministry, he doesn't say, I came to found Vatican City. He says, I came to bring good news to the poor and to heal the lame and feed the hungry and give vision to the blind and to free the imprisoned. All those problems would be solved if we could upload, if we could be uploaded. The incarnation would lose its point. Cor Deus Homo would be no need for it. The only reason you need a deus homo is if you have a homo to begin with. The whole imaginative framework, the whole imaginary of biblical religion would break up. All the distinctions that theology has depended upon to stay in business between matter and spirit, body and soul, time and eternity, all those things would just simply be broken up. The less mortal we become, the less human we become, the more our divine partner will just fade away. Now, what I would say is that, so what is the task of a theology in the future? What I would say is, would go something like this. If you go back to the fundamental religious, theological, quasi-religious trope in Derrida, it's that of the messianic, right? The messianic without a messiah, the pure structure of the messianicity, the pure structure of the to come. And that future is radically unforeseeable. It's structurally unforeseeable. It's not just simply ontologically, not just simply epistemologically unknown. It's ontologically unforeseeable. It didn't happen yet. I would say that the deep structure of religion is embedded in this notion of the to come, and it's tied up with the notion of mystery. The sense of openness to something incomprehensible. What I mentioned this last week, what Schelling calls das Unvordenkliche, the thing that thinking can't get its head around. That's the mystery. And that, it seems to me, is the irreducible religious structure in human existence. If you were doing a phenomenology of religion, I would say that religion is ultimately a way of narrating, imaging, figuring, singing and dancing, wondering about the mystery, about the unprethinkable. And that means that religion would reconfigure, the religion of the future would reconfigure away from the sort of earthbound, carnal-bound, species-bound imaginary that is inherited from the Bible and from Greek metaphysics, and turn its attention to the mystery of the universe itself, which repeats in its own way all of the features of the mysterium tremendum et passions. And that structure, it seems to me, is irreducible. And if you think the religious in those terms, if you think about what Nietzsche calls a coming species of philosophers, or let's say a coming species of theologians, if you think philosophy is wonder, then it seems to me that's where religion will have to reconfigure, or have to rethink itself in those terms, in terms of galaxies far, far away. The mystical, I think, right now, is lining itself up more and more with science. Religion is lining itself up more and more with superstition. That's what has to change. Does religion have a future? Question is does it deserve to have a future? And I would say the answer is there, in a new sense of the mystical, a new sense of wonder, a new sense of the mysterium tremendum that is prepared to break with the kind of religion we've been talking about for a couple of millennia now. Okay, that's plenty for now. That's too much, actually. We need some time for for discussion. You want to know more? Read my next book, which will be coming out from Indiana next year.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Caputo, for this brilliant and thought-provoking presentation. Let me ask you a quick question. In several of your books, you claim that according to radical hermeneutics, interpretation goes all the way down, and that without deconstruction, hermeneutics risks being naive, and without hermeneutics, on the other hand, deconstruction risks running off the rails. So that's how one should proceed to deconstruct the very idea of pure objectivity or pure facts and replace it with the distinction between good interpretations and bad ones. Now, how would you apply this very conception of a radical hermeneutics to the way you just made a differentiation or some distinction between superstitious religion and a theology that maintains the dialogue with science and contemporary culture?
Well, I mean, what I called radical hermeneutics then is what I'm perfectly willing to call radical theology now, where the radicality consists in the exposure to the unaccomplishable. The radical consists in recognizing the fragility of our being, the contingency of our being, the limits of our comprehension, and taking that not as a defeat, but as a moment of self-knowledge and self-recognition. That kind of, I don't know, in Lacanian terms, I don't talk like this very much, but in Lacanian terms, you would say it's a kind of coming to grips with the lack that we are, that constitutes us, and recognizing the contingency of our constructions. And the reason I keep holding on this word hermeneutics is, see, when Jacques talked about hermeneutics, he was thinking about Paul Ricoeur, and he was thinking about, he thought of hermeneutics as a kind of key to unlocking the problem in the text, right? Now, when I use the word hermeneutics, I'm not thinking about Paul Ricoeur. I'm thinking about Heidegger's hermeneutics of facticity in 1919 to 1922, which is recognizing the radical contingency and constructiveness, the fear and the trembling, all that. So thinking about religion in this more radical way, thinking of a kind of cosmic religion here now in contemporary terms, that's the same project. It's open. What Heidegger calls openness to the mystery is not limited to the Schwarzwald. It's a cosmic phenomenon, and so I take this structure of openness to the mystery to be a radical feature of our radical existence. And I see it here. The other thing I didn't bring up, I don't know if I brought it up last week, but one of the things that makes this really interesting is right now, the consensus is, I mean, tomorrow morning it's all, but it could all change. But right now, the consensus is the universe is heading for a birth. Right? Did we talk about that last week? Did I bring that up last week? Right now, the universe is expanding at an increasingly accelerated rate, heading into entropic dissipation, and that'll be that. At the end, there'll be oblivion. Now, that sort of adds a little element of mystery too, right? It's not a problem because it's incalculably far away. It's not a problem, and there's nothing we can do about it. But it is a mystery. It is a mystery, and I think the mystery is the radical structure. So this is still radical hermeneutics. I didn't call this radical theology. Other people started calling it radical theology, and I just said, well, why not? I would still be calling it radical. If I were still going to SPEP meetings, I would still be calling it radical hermeneutics.
Oops, sorry. You guys keep thinking of other questions. There is one question here. When you talk about humans becoming cyborgs, cybernetic organisms, transhumanism, and posthumanism, what, after all, makes humans human? If I understand you correctly, in that it cannot be anything metaphysical or theological, like a human soul, a transcending essence, or having been created in God's image and likeness, or anything resembling the old humanism of the inner self, would you be content with Donna Haraway's proposal of a new posthumanist humanism, or with whatever is meant by what Derrida called autoimmunity? Is this similar to your own phrasing of the question? How do you program a machine to do the unprogrammable, that is, to interpret?
Well, yeah, I think the crucial issue is if you go back to Aristotle's definition of the zoon, echan, logon, then what's irreducible, the irreducible human element here is the biological. That is we are a species of animals. That's the irreducible human element. And when radical posthumanists talk about posthumanism, they mean transcending biology. But Donna Haraway's sense of a posthumanist humanism means the body, the organic, the bodily, the animals, the environment. And would I be content with that? Yeah, I'd be content with that. What I'm saying is that may be as far as we're going to get with extraordinarily enhanced, long-lived organisms. And that may be as far as is practical to go. I don't know. But what interests me is what is the to come thing here. The open-ended prospect, the projection, desire to transcend biology. That's interesting. And would I be content with that? I mean, that really pushes the limits of thinkability for me, and I think that's what genuinely interests me. But I think the cyborg, that's the more cautious principle, and that's the direction the theology is going right now. But Teilhard de Chardin, he was an evolutionary anthropologist, but he had this idea, of a sort of cloud, a noosphere, which would be a global consciousness. That's so I'd pretend to be a highly enhanced organism that was going to live for 700 years, like Methuselah, but this other thing is sort of more haunting, spectral,
Thank you. Dr. Lee Johnson, please.
Uh-oh. Now this one's going to be a really hard question. I should have told you to save her for last, and then I would have said, well, we're out of time.
Jack, that was just such a great talk. I really appreciated all of it. And I really do think that you are digging into the really important questions that are emerging, and like, how do we think about the world that is unfolding before us, which I think, unfortunately, we're not trying to get out ahead of, and I really appreciate your work in trying to get out ahead of it. Nevertheless, I do have a couple of questions. I'm really interested in your kind of contrast between your characterization of theologians as like wanting to be cyborgs, and I think, maybe I was wrong, but I thought what you said was like hardliners who want to be angels. And
not hardline theologians, hardliners who are not, who are transcendent. You want to get rid of theology and religion.
exactly right. Yes.
Like
Yeah.
court
Sorry.
trial.
Yeah, exactly. So I should have. So, yes, that's what I understood. So I think that. So let me just kind of pose a scenario for you, because I think that that idea that it's a future possibility that will be angels is a, like, those horses are already out of the barn. Like, we are already all angels, like in exactly the way that you described it. Like, we're all instant messengers, we're all super intelligent. I mean, in a sense of super intelligence, we're all we all can live forever, or there is, the data part of ourselves will live, could live infinitely beyond our meat space physical selves. I wonder if there's a way of like sort of framing exactly what you're projecting as instead a present reality, and saying instead, isn't this already the new religion, right? Like, and even connecting it to, for example, the Christian tradition, where we might say, wherever two or more are gathered, there is God, right? I mean, that we already are that we already are a community of angels that, wherever, that are always connected, and where the sort of presence of a real or imagined or enacted, transcendent being is already there. I'm wondering if that might be the way to go, because here's the worry for me. So I teach philosophy of technology classes every semester, and I'm constantly baffled by how completely embedded and completely comfortable my students are. So, 20-year-olds are with the angelic status of their actual existence, without any kind of real sense of how this is such a dramatic departure from what only 20 years, like at the moment of their birth, would have been unimaginable, literally unimaginable, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if when you're talking about AI and the future of religion, whether or not the future of religion is already here. Like, we're living what was the future of religion, and now it's reimagining what that's going to look like. That's my first question. My second question, which I'll just state quickly, is that I'm also just curious to hear your response to this idea, or rather this correction to the idea that, like, the cloud is like, there is no cloud. It's always somebody else's computer. Like, the cloud is always embodied. It's always material. Like, so this idea that people, like, I do feel like this is a real failure of intellectuals in the 21st century, is to talk about the internet, the cloud, as if it's ethereal and, disembodied and immaterial. And it's never is. And so, and actually it has like real environmental and real world, material impact. So those are my two questions. Thanks.
Well, doesn't your second question answer your first question? That is, we are, what we're talking about are, I mean, the distinction here is a distinction between enhancement and transcending. And we are already angels, yes, insofar as, if you, as you say, your students who were not even alive 20 years ago, 22 years ago, they don't appreciate how utterly transformed the world has become, and how we have launched something radically new. I think Ilya likes to say, in the new axial age. but it is still, we are still in the age of enhancement, not transcendence. And as you point out, the cloud really is a bunch of computers in Nevada or someplace, right? Rhetorically, pedagogically, I would say, yes, we are already angels. I mean, I think to some extent that's what Michel Serres is doing there. He's trying to shock us with this figure of something which is apparently ridiculous and medieval, and he's saying is actually the future. Yeah, I see what you mean. I think that's true, but I still think that in terms of a distinction between a cyborg and an upload, you're still talking about various versions of cybernetic enhancement, not an upload. But it would also be the case. I don't know. What would you ever be able to get rid of those computers in Nevada? Could information ever detach itself from that? You know, but it could, I don't know. It's your problem. I think you muted yourself.
You're muted.
Okay, so we got time for another question here, I would think. Do we?
Right, yeah. When we deal with AI nowadays, we talk a lot about machine learning, deep learning, and the like. Now, do you think supercomputers and androids would ever be able to learn from suffering beyond the simulation and imitation games?
Well, first of all, yeah, they will certainly be able to learn. That's exactly what they're doing right now. I mean, they're building computers and how to learn. I mean, all the objections that philosophers make to computer scientists, they say, that's interesting. We'll have to build a computer that can do that. You know, all of Bert Dreyfus's objections became inspirations for new computer science projects. And quantum computing, if they could ever get that going, will be, but there are already lots of self-learning technologies out there. What was it? I've forgotten the rest of there was another point I wanted to make about that.
Well,
what was the end of this?
Yeah, is it going beyond the idea of imitation and simulation?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I said in about the building a program for the unprogrammable, building an auto-correcting program. That's a basic goal of computer research right now. The other part of that question, last question I didn't answer, was about this human spirit and the soul and all that. I think all of those are impressionistic ideas that are part of what I mean by a theologian to come, is that they'll recognize that way of talking, which basically is Greek and not biblical anyway, is obsolete, is becoming obsolete. That was part of the other question you would ask me. But self-instructing technologies, programs that are programmed to correct themselves are common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have another question here from Camila Barbosa. Please, Camila, would you like to ask the question yourself?
Sure, I could. I was thinking how the question of salvation would look like in this point of view. I was wondering if the question of salvation it will still exist in these angelical selves that you are talking about, and if could this transition to posthumanism be understood as a kind of salvation in some sense?
That's good. Yeah, I like that. Well, I mean, I think that Kurzweil in particular although a number of these guys, but Kurzweil in particular does think that this is going to be a salvific, apocalyptic transformation. But of course, I mean, that's why I said, you know, the dinosaurs weren't succeeded by bigger and better dinosaurs. We could entirely, we could come to grief with all of this. The notion of salvation in the classical Christian sense is involves corporeal suffering. Oh, that's the part that I left out, the suffering part. It involved a corporeal suffering, which for Anselm anyway. I mean, I don't actually think this is in the New Testament, but in Anselm anyway, corporeal suffering was part of the atonement. Whereas they're talking about transcending suffering. So physical suffering would be transcended. And so the incarnation, as it is classically conceived in Christianity, would become obsolete. It would no longer have any work to do. There would be no flesh that would be, but there would still be. Remember, there were bad angels, right? So there's the malicious software, malicious AI is real. Agents who would torpedo the systems that would be in place, that would cause them to malfunction. I mean, would there'd be a kind of, I don't know if we can say this, electronic counterpart to suffering in dysfunctionality, misinformation, jammed computers, all of that. But it would be different. You wouldn't be suffering from an ulcer. You'd be suffering. There'd be another kind of malware that would become, the problem of evil would become the problem of malware.
That was fantastic. Malware and virus. These would be very good metaphors for Derrida, right?
Yeah. Oh yes. Oh, indeed. Yes. Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, here's a word from the sponsor. I cannot resist this. You remember back in the 70s and the 80s, the realists were all over Derrida for being. You talk about writing, and text, and the word text for them was a word of scorn and mockery. Textualism meant this ridiculous man who plays with words. Right? Can you think of any word that is any more important now than text, writing, programmability? There's hardly a more important problem than the problem that we were just talking about of a program for the unprogrammable. Derrida was saying the answer to structuralism and the programmable is not existential individualism. It's an alternate open-ended system. The important distinction is between closed systems and open systems, between systems that are completely formalizable and systems that are not formalizable. Undecidability was a word he was using from Gödel, who had a formal proof of the formal undecidability of any mathematical system. And Derrida was making a counterpart argument about that. When Derrida said everything is writing, he was saying everything is information. It is flows of information. And the crucial thing is to keep the flows of information flowing and open, right? And so all these people who mock textualism, should be red-faced at this moment. They should be. They owe him an apology. It was this of grammatology was as prophetic a book that was as was ever written in the 20th century. It predicted. It was about information technologies, about the gramme, about traces, about RNA, and like that.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
I
Another.
I had to get that in.
There is another question here from one of our graduate students. Hello, Professor Caputo. Thank you so much for the lecture. Please consider these questions. Following the argument that the mysteries go beyond our rational abilities, how do you see some quantum physics explanations? For instance, do you think quantum physics could be a possible epistemological bridge between religion and philosophy? Thanks again.
Sure. Yes, the answer to that is yes. This Karen Barat is a really good example of this. And so is Iliad to some extent, but Karen Barat wrote this, quantum hauentology. This is what she calls it. And yeah, that's exactly the sort of thing that I would be interested in. When I say go beyond our rational abilities, I don't know if I actually did put it that way. I would say there is something that surpasses our intelligence, but it is constantly nourishing our intelligence just as well. Schelling had the notion of what he called ecstatic reason, where reason it was not the closed system. He was criticizing Hegel. And he said, Vernunft in Hegel is closed. It's comprehensive. It's the Begriff ultimately encompasses everything. And Schelling said, no, he says, reason, Vernunft is ecstatic. It's exposed. There will always be something that reason is exposed to, is surpassed but exposed to, and that doesn't defeat or demoralize it. It nourishes it. It draws it. It lures it. It calls it. So reason is not against reason. It's an ecstatic reason.
Thank you.
And I think philosophical wonder and theological praise come together in the mystery of the universe. Theology is ultimately praising something. Philosophy is wondering at something. And I think they come together in the mystery of the cosmos. I think that's where things are heading. And that's why I want religion to get on board, get out of the Bible Belt and think about the stars.
Thank you, Professor Caputo. I think that Dr. Johnson has another question. Please, Lee, go ahead. We can't hear you, I think.
Sorry.
You're
I
muted.
have to go back and read it. So this is in reference to your earlier claim about the reliance of the notion of salvation on corporeal suffering. So do you think that the requirement of corporeal suffering could be translated without loss to the suffering of non-corporeal beings? So like in terms of psychological suffering, like depression, loneliness, heartache, or social suffering, like isolation, or political suffering, like justice? Sure.
Absolutely. Sure. Actually, it was not a great movie, but that Johnny Depp movie about transcendence. It was a film about actually doing this, about uploading a consciousness. He was miserable. And it was psychic misery. The upload itself was a psychic misery. And yeah, and there's all kinds of psychological conscience. I don't like this word consciousness, because it's so much Descartes for me. But there certainly is the distress of the mind that is profound. Yeah, sure.
Could I just ask a quick follow-up? Is that okay? Because it sounds like, I suppose the obvious follow-up question to that would be then, can you imagine a religion without corporeal bodies? So
Well, that's
a
my
religion,
question. Yeah.
a religion that is not without corporeal bodies, that maintains the structure of religion that you have described, throughout your corpus. So yeah, so that's not like the heavenly, choir of angels, but that still requires all of these complicated, relationships and negotiations, and that requires, love and forgiveness and maybe salvation and redemption, but that is not dependent on actual physical suffering.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Can't you, the deep structure of the religious for me would transcend a body soul distinction, and it would transcend classical notions of sin and redemption. Yeah, sure. That's what I'm interested in. Or that's what I would be interested in if I were 60 years younger.
But it seems like when you say that, right, that then what you said earlier, which is that theologians want to be cyborgs, kind of makes theologians sound like masochists, right? It's like they want to hold on to physical suffering.
They want to hold on to the incarnation and the body. They want. I mean, look, the body. The theologians I'm talking about, by the way, are the progressives. The conservatives, the religious people who write about this stuff are by and large reactionaries. I mean, they are really, they start out with the assumption that some of this may be inconsistent with the Bible and therefore it's wrong. People like Thwaite Bates and Delio are very progressive people who are willing to see religion undergo a real transformation. But underlying all of that is a commitment to, I mean, it's particularly true of biblical religion, because biblical religion, the Jewish scriptures are about bodies and children and land. The Christian scriptures are about an oppressed people. So the biblical tradition is irreducibly carnal. And in Christianity, everything turns on incarnation and sacramentality. So that they mean to celebrate the religion in that sense is a celebration of the earth and of the body and of physicality and of animality. And they don't want to lose that. They want religion to be sacramental and earthly and physical. And the notion of transcending that spooks them. Who had spooked Nietzsche? Spooked Heidegger.
Mm-hmm.
Heidegger said, looking back at when he saw those pictures of the Earth from the moon, he totally spooked. Spooked. The specters, spectrality. They spooked in dem ganzen Welt.
Right.
Okay, I actually have to break off myself here. We've got.
Well, Jack Caputo, once again, thank you so much for such a beautiful presentation in this very, very instigating discussion. We are all very motivated to keep going and thinking about all these questions over the weekend. So you guys have a nice week. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Take care. Stay healthy and safe. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Bye-bye.
You guys.